How do you decide which academic journal to publish your scholarly research in? Stick around and find out 10 key tips to getting it done here today on Navigating Academia. Welcome to Navigating Academia, your leading source for guidance on how to advance your career in academia. As always, I appreciate the love, so please do like and share this video, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell, and comment below. You can find me on these social media accounts. So let's jump right in. Today we're going to be discussing 10 tips in identifying that academic journal which is perfect for you, the one that has the best fit for you to publish your scholarly research in. A lot of people who are new to the field, or even those of us who have been steeped in it for quite some time, every now and again run into a situation where they're just not quite sure where a piece belongs. This may be because the piece is super niche, it may be because it's in an area that they've just never been in before. I remember years ago, before I was in the field of forensic psychology, I was in the field of behavioral genetics, and I remember looking, where in the world am I supposed to publish some of this work? And after I got into violence risk assessment, the whole landscape of behavioral genetics changed to the point where when I did do another behavioral genetics piece, literally a decade later almost, I ended up finding that everything was different, and the journals that I'd once published in were no longer the ones that everybody was really seeking to get into. So it's really important to be able to choose the right outlet for your research at the right time. And what we're going to be doing today is going through 10 key tips that you can utilize to be able to identify the journal that, if you submit to it, is going to maximize the likelihood that you're going to get your piece published and read. Tip number 1, search out journals that have recently published research in your area. Now, this is a lot easier for certain research topics than others. The more niche your topic, the easier it's going to be because there's simply not going to be a ton of existing literature out there. So if that's the case, simply go to something like Google Scholar, go to something like PubMed, ERIC, Embase, CINAHL. There's going to be search engines for no matter what field you're in. And just search different Boolean keywords. Use Boolean operators like parentheses or quotation marks, whatever you need to do to be able to identify key terms that have to do with your research project. And in doing so, you can identify that literature, find out the journals in which those pieces were published, and you can make the assumption that those journals are going to provide a strong goodness of fit for your topic. Now, not only if you've got a really niche area is this going to be easy, but also if your field itself is a pretty specific subfield. So remember, I've been in the field of forensic mental health for quite some time. One area which is super hot is focused on the assessment and treatment of individuals convicted of different kinds of sexual offense. And within that subfield, there's really only 3 journals. There's a couple more smaller ones, but the 3 that are the big ones, one's called Sexual Abuse, one's the Journal of Sexual Aggression, and the third is Sexual Offender Treatment. You don't really have tons more options in terms of where to publish if you want to publish in a journal that focuses on that niche. But it could be something where you want to shoot outside of that niche. For example, a more general criminal justice journal, something like Law and Human Behavior or Criminal Justice and Behavior, using again forensic mental health as the area that we're focused on for this example. At the end of the day, once you find journals that have recently, I recommend in the last 5 years, published research on your topic, you can assume that the goodness of fit is there to be able to move forward. And if nothing else, look at the instructions for authors in terms of how your piece is going to need to be formatted, and also the different kinds of articles that that journal is looking for. And that's going to help you to further assess whether that specific journal is a good fit for your piece. Tip number 2 is to consider the impact factor of the different journals in your field. Now, the impact factor, if you don't know what that is a way to quantify the influence of a journal with regards to the rate at which new publications published annually are being cited in the field. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the pieces are being read, but it does mean that they're being cited, and this is a measure of influence, or as it's being referred to here, impact. So this is what we're trying to take a look at when we're comparing different journals, is how likely is my piece going to get cited? Now, this is important for a few reasons, the first and foremost of which is that it's going to influence what's called your H-index as an academic, which is basically your personal impact factor, and that can be used for anything from to judge how influential you are in terms of people looking for speakers at conferences, to whether or not you get that raise or that promotion from assistant to associate to full professor, or let's say you're in another country which uses the British system, to be able to determine, are you going to stay at a senior lecturer, or are you going to start working up the ranks to be able to get to that status as professor? Now, this is something that's important to take a look at, regardless of whether you think impact factor is important, because other people in the field do. And the fact of the matter is, the larger the impact factor, usually the larger the overall readership. And this is the reason why you would want to focus on impact factor. However, you can't take the impact factor of specific fields and compare them to other fields. For example, if you have an impact factor which is quite low, let's say under 1, for instance, and you're comparing it with journals in general medicine where you can get impact factors 20, 30, and above, that's not a really appropriate comparison to make. Because it's true that maybe your piece is going to get read way more with those higher impact factor journals, but you have to take into consideration the fact that, hey, if I have fewer people in my field, then that means that there's going to be fewer papers coming out, meaning fewer citations, meaning a lower impact factor. Right? So just because a journal has a lower or a higher impact factor doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right or wrong for you respectively. But what you should do is make a list of the different journals that seem to be relevant to your field and to your specific topic, and take a look at their impact factors, rank them by impact factor, and that, if nothing else, is going to give you a very important piece of information that you can use when evaluating where to submit. Tip number 3 is related, and it's to consider the readership of different journals in your field. Let's go back for a moment to be able to use that same example of, within the field of criminal justice, this subfield of sexual offender assessment and treatment. It's something where if I want to get to the most number of academics and clinicians who are going to be working within that field, it would make perfect sense to focus on one of those 3 key journals that I discussed. Yes, if you go with one of the more general journals like Criminal Justice and Behavior or Law and Human Behavior, you're probably going to get more of a readership. It's a larger readership at the end of the day. However, to have the maximum impact, pardon the pun on impact factor, impact on your field, and hopefully the most impact on clinicians who are the ones serving the population that you're trying to talk about and to influence evidence-based best practices on, it could be really wise to go with a lower impact journal that has your targeted readership. So take that into consideration. You may also want to take into consideration whether or not a given journal is given for free as part of the membership fee, which is charged as part of a professional association. For example, there's an association called ATSA, which is the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. They're the ones who publish that journal called Sexual Abuse. So you can make the assumption that, hey, if I respect that organization, maybe I'm a member myself, those are the individuals I want to influence, those members. Obviously, you have a better chance of doing that publishing in their journal versus a competing journal. Tip number 4 is to reach out to the editor with the abstract of your work to see if it's a good fit. Oftentimes people don't think about doing this. A lot of times people get kind of intimidated or afraid of rejection. They say to themselves, if I take my piece and I send it directly to the editor, I email him or her and I say, Dear Dr. Smith, sincerely hoping this message finds you well. I'm considering submitting a piece to your esteemed journal and was wondering whether you perceived it to be a good fit for your journal at this time. For example, let's say that you have a specific piece in a niche field on something that, that journal published pieces on it, but 15 years ago. Maybe it's not even on the radar of the new editor, because probably the editor will turn over, every several years to a decade. So you want to make sure it's of interest to the current editor and editorial board. And this is the best way to do it. Simply provide your abstract. Don't make the abstract too long. Don't make the email too long, and send it out. The worst thing that can happen is either they don't get back to you or they get back to you and they say, hey, really appreciate it. This piece is just not a good fit for us at this time. You could even say in your initial email, if you don't believe it's a good fit, would it be at all possible, which is the magic phrase, would it be at all possible to suggest some alternative journals that you feel may be a good fit at this time? Because hey, sometimes when it comes to publishing, you gotta run down that rabbit hole. You never know quite where it is you should start, but the best thing you can do is to just start somewhere, because it's important to be able to begin that process. Now, if the editor does get back to you and they say, yes, this piece seems good, this is excellent, because it means that if you do submit to that journal, even if all you have done is the abstract at that point, and then you're going to do the rest of the paper, you already have an outlet which you like in terms of a specific journal, otherwise you wouldn't have written to the editor, where you know that you can submit and the editor is going to be interested in it and pass it along to the associate editors to go out for peer review. And that, of course, is the critical first step in the peer review process, which will result in you getting that piece published and raising your personal ranking and brand within your field. Tip number 5 is to ask colleagues for suggestions. Oftentimes we maybe worry about our colleagues insofar as, they may judge us for not knowing what are the leading journals in a given field, etc. But really this is something, not to have any hubris on. It's very important that you develop a network of trusted colleagues that you can help, where they can help you, and where there's a real deep sense of camaraderie. Because in academia, it can be pretty cutthroat, right? It can be pretty brutal. There can be blood in the streets depending on the field that you're in. So it's important to identify a set of colleagues. It can be as small as one colleague or two colleagues that you can bounce ideas off of, and vice versa. So when asking for their suggestions, provide them with the abstract of the piece. They even may request the full piece. Given that you trust these colleagues, it is an infinitesimally small chance that they're going to take the piece. Certainly, it's almost a 0% chance that they're going to steal the piece. It really doesn't happen, but newer academics sometimes get afraid of that. Or even if you're not a new academic, you're in middle or late career, but it's simply something where you haven't published a paper in a while, or you haven't reached out to those colleagues in a while. Some people get worried about that. But it's really not something that you should use as a reason not to reach out to colleagues, okay? Tip number 6 is to take a look for upcoming special issues. Now, a special issue of a journal is one where all of the journal articles in that issue are going to focus on a specific topic. For example, within the field of criminal justice, you could have something where let's say the articles are about juvenile fire setting, or let's say you're in philosophy, it's all going to be criticisms of works by Kierkegaard. Whatever it is, whatever field you're in, all journals are usually open to special issues. These special issues are usually guest edited, right? So it's not the regular editor, they're guest edited by an expert in the field. Sometimes they're up and coming, sometimes they're already established, anything in between. But for those special issues, usually there's a call for papers. There's a formal invitation that's put out. So once you've identified those journals that you think could be a good fit, make sure to get on their mailing list. Should be pretty easy to subscribe via their direct website, or if the journal is associated with an association, get on that association's mailing list, and there should be a call for papers that will go out. If you end up identifying a special issue, this is great because if your journal article has to do with that specific topic, which is the theme of that issue, your chances of getting published are significantly higher. So be sure to stay on the lookout for that. Oftentimes, these special issues, the calls for papers, will come out many months, right? Sometimes over a year before that article actually is being, or that issue is actually being compiled in terms of the final drafts of papers. So you usually have enough lead time to be able to polish up your piece and send it to the guest editor for their consideration. Tip number 7 is to consider publishing, or submitting at least, to newer journals from publishers that have good track records and reputations. So to give you an example of this, there's a very famous medical journal called The Lancet. And a few years ago, they started coming out with a variety of new journals. Some may even call them spin-offs. One, for example, was called Lancet Psychiatry. And Lancet Psychiatry didn't have an impact factor. It was a new journal. Obviously, because of that, the number of submissions to that journal were quite limited, especially to start off with. Now, just like any new journal, usually the editor, the associate editors, the editorial boards were reaching out to colleagues who are experts in that field, requesting papers to be able to increase the visibility of the journal and hopefully to begin getting on that track to getting an impact factor, because it doesn't take a few months to get an impact factor or a few issues. It takes years usually to get an impact factor, which is recognized by, it's called ISI, right? They put out the impact factors. So at the end of the day, why would you do this? Why would you do it in a journal that only has a few issues out? They're in maybe their first or second volume. They have a limited number of citations of the work that's already been published. Well, there's a few reasons. First and foremost is that you're going to be in good company, because usually the people submitting to that journal are going to be either editorial board members or colleagues who are experts in the field who have been grouped together, right, have been culled together by this editorial board, including the editor and associate editors. So you're going to be in some pretty good company to start off with, those first few issues especially. The second is that it's an investment. Down the line, a few years from now, the likelihood is that this journal is going to have an impact factor, because if you have a well-respected publisher or a well-respected key journal that's being spun off like The Lancet, the name Lancet has a lot of cachet. So Lancet Psychiatry, in the years since it's been published, has been going up and up and up in terms of its visibility and the citation counts for each of its representative journal articles. And this is very important to take into consideration if you are a young academic, especially, where you have a number of years to build your career and you can grow along with the journal. Now, because it's a newer journal as well, the likelihood is increased that you're going to get that piece published, because, simply stated, there's fewer submissions and they need the articles to be able to publish. Now, this isn't to say that if you have a poor quality article, it's going to get published. All I'm saying is that because it's supply and demand, right? If there's less supply, there's going to be more demand, and you want to take advantage of that. Tip number 8 is to be able to take a look at the editorial board for each of the journals that you're considering submitting to. You can tell who's on the editorial board by simply looking at the website of the journal, or even in every issue of the journal, you can take a look and it'll have that list, right? And this is very important because you can see a couple of things. Number one, is there anybody on that editorial board who is already in your niche area? Right? So for example, for me, my number one area of expertise when I was in forensic psychology was violence risk assessment. So I would always take a look at the list, and I would usually know which colleagues on that editorial board were in my field versus in other fields, or folks that I hadn't had the pleasure of reading their work and didn't recognize the names. So this is important, number one, because probably this is the colleagues to whom your pieces are going to go for initial peer review. And this is critical because if those are individuals who have a very different theoretical orientation than you do, or, you know, bureaucracy, right? Maybe you've had run-ins with in the past, they didn't like one of the pieces that you published, for instance, or was critical of their work, whatever, and now they're out for revenge, which seems very high school, but welcome to academia. To be honest with you, it happens way more than you would think. It's important to take these things into consideration, okay? Even if it's something where, let's say that you're a graduate student, your supervisor has beef with one of the individuals on the editorial board or with the editor or associate editors, you should probably consider not applying to or submitting to that journal, or if you do submit, they're going to request a few preferred reviewers, people that you think, yeah, these guys would be experts in the field who understand the topic of the article that I'm submitting. But you should also have some opposed reviewers where you say, these guys have a conflict of interest, I don't think that they should be included in the individuals being considered by the associate editors to provide the peer review. And it's important that you take a look at who's on the editorial board, because that's going to be the first line of who the associate editors go to. So you can be sure that if there's any kind of problem with the people on that editorial board, that you need to really proceed with caution there, okay? Now, the other reason to take a look at the editorial board is if you look and there's really nobody on there who's in your area of expertise, then by submitting to that journal, dream situation, getting published in that journal, it can make a strong case for you to be able to really accelerate the process with which you go to them and say, I want to be an ad hoc reviewer for you, or I want to be on your editorial board. And you have an amazing board as it stands, but I'm bringing something unique to the table. It's an existing sub-area or it's a growing niche, and I think it would be a great opportunity and mutually beneficial, you say this to the editor or the associate editor, to get involved with the journal, to be able to show you my stuff by being an ad hoc for a while, but then hopefully being on the board. It would be mutually beneficial, and I would really love to volunteer my time to do that. This is a great first step if you're going to submit and hopefully get published in that journal. So be sure to take a look at all these things in terms of reviewing that editorial board. Tip number 9 is consider doing or returning a favor for a colleague. The higher you get in the field, the more experience you have, the more connections you have, the more you're going to get to know individuals who are on editorial boards or are editors or associate editors themselves. And there may be cases where just in casual conversation within the field, you'll end up finding that you're not only making colleagues, but making friends with a lot of individuals. They may say that, they're thinking of coming up with a special issue, but they're looking for papers and don't know who to turn to, or there may be starting their own journal, for instance, or spinning off from a larger name journal, etc. If you can do a favor for those individuals by submitting your piece, or return a favor for someone who's already done one for you, you should take into consideration the politics of that, which can provide really good optics for you in the field and in that relationship. So when considering where to submit, that's something to keep in mind. And finally, tip number 10. Consider alternatives to peer-reviewed journals. For example, things like book chapters or newsletters in your field, or even conference abstracts. A lot of conferences that you go to, they'll provide you with this thick document, right? I mean, this big book-looking thing, which has sometimes almost entire papers, or sometimes long abstracts, long-form abstracts. Not one paragraph, but multi-page abstracts, which other individuals in the field can cite. Now, why would you want to consider doing this? Well, peer-reviewed journal articles can take really quite some time to come out, and the process can be very arduous, the peer review process. If you're in a really niche area, or the topic that you're discussing is, maybe it's a narrative review, right, of the literature, so it's not something that's statistical in any way, shape, or form, it's not a systematic review or meta-analysis, maybe it's an opinion piece, which is long form, but you want to get it published, and maybe when you're going to journals, they keep saying, not the right fit, not the right fit. Where are you going to turn? Well, book chapters are a great place to go. Really just explore in the field who's working on books. There's no real website you can go to for that. It's all just networking, asking individuals who are, quote unquote, super connectors in your field and seem to know everybody. So find out what books are getting published, approach the editors or authors of those books, and ask whether it may be possible to contribute a book chapter, send them the work that you've got, and ask for feedback. Newsletters are also great. They tend to be from a professional organization. Usually that professional organization doesn't have a journal. In some case they do, and this is something that comes out more frequently. Maybe the journal itself comes out monthly and this comes out weekly, or whatever other frequency pattern you may see in an association. And it may be more of a trade organization where, for example, in psychology, maybe it's not American Psychological Association, but it's the Union of Psychologists who work for a specific company in a specific state. If it still is going to provide you access to the readership that you're seeking, it's a great area to be able to submit to, especially because the folks who read newsletters tend to be very involved with the field. They want to know what's going on, and because of that, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to have your piece actually read or noticed, if nothing else. Now, keep in mind that people more rarely are going to cite things, though, like newsletters, and book chapters you get a little bit better on in terms of citation count, but peer-reviewed articles are really the way to go in higher impact journals. Right? And in terms of conference abstracts, this is really, I would say, the last line of defense. But again, if you want to present your piece, if you want something that especially you can cite, other people are very unlikely going to cite it unless they're other individuals on that conference abstract. Say you have two other colleagues on that piece, those are probably the folks who are going to cite this stuff, right? So take into consideration that a peer-reviewed journal may not, for a given piece, be the best form of outlet. So those are the 10 tips for today. I thank you guys so much for watching. I want to hear from you in the comments below. How have you decided where to publish your research in the past? Or if you haven't published anything in the past, what kinds of outlets are you personally exploring? If you have any tips and tricks that you would like to share with the channel, please do so. Because remember, this is academia, and at the end of the day, we're one big family and we're all in this together. Don't forget to like and share this video with your colleagues, subscribe and follow us on social media. If you're interested in one-on-one career mentoring, set a consultation call with me via the website below. Signing off, everyone. Have a great day, and remember to get out there, take chances, and be your best self. Thank you so much for stopping by, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here as always. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more in this series on navigating academia, please click on one of these links over here to be able to view more original content. I hope to see you there.